My name is Emma Donnelly with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and I am here on April 21st, 2020 with my grandmother, Linda Marie Donnelly. Thank you for talking with me today. Could you please start by introducing yourself with your name and when and where you were born?
Okay, my name is Linda Marie Donnelly. Do you want my maiden name?
Sure.
So my name would be actually Linda Marie Scarnavac Donnelly. I was born on August 9th, 1940 in Woodlawn Hospital, which isn't there anymore, in Chicago, Illinois.
Great, thank you. Would you please briefly name and describe the schools you attended growing up?
Well, the first school I went to, I only went to for like a day, so I won't talk about that one. Then the first real school I went to was Hull Redeemer. It was a Catholic grammar school in Evergreen Park, Illinois, which was a suburb immediately west of Chicago, south. And I attended there until second grade when my family moved into Chicago into a neighborhood called Beverly Hills, which was on the south side of Chicago, south of the Loop. And I went to Christ the King grade school, Catholic grade school. Graduated from there in 8th grade in 1954. Then went to the Academy of Our Lady, nicknamed Longwood Academy, which was in Chicago, also on the south side. Wasn't an actual neighborhood school, but lots of neighborhood schools fed into it. And then after I graduated from there in 1958, I went to St. Xavier College in Chicago and graduated from there in 1962.
Could you tell me about your work experience throughout your life?
Yes, let's see. As a younger child, young teen, I babysat, but wasn't real fond of doing it, so I didn't do it very frequently. The first paying job I had, I was quite young. I worked in a bank. I learned how to do the stuff that tellers do and learned how to work the switchboard, which at that time was an old trunk switchboard, which had, the cords and stuff that you plugged into holes. And I was about 12 years old. It was a summer job. The man who was our neighbor owned the bank and asked if I wanted to work there because he was going to be having his daughter there, who was a couple years younger than I. And so I said, sure. So that was my first job, paying job. Let's see, then I didn't, then in the, let's see. I didn't actually work through high school. The next job I had wasn't until I was in college, and it was a summer job. No, I'm sorry, back up. The next job I had was when I was 17. My father had died, and another neighbor owned a restaurant, and I couldn't work during the day because my mother was working at the time. And so I stayed home and took care of my two younger sisters while she worked. And then at night, I went to work at this restaurant as a cashier and did that. And then I just did that for that first summer. And then the next jobs I had were, I guess the next 2 summers when I was in college, I worked for the Cook County Department of Public Aid. And I had a job as a typist, and I would type up the caseworkers' notes. Then the only other job I had was after I was married.
What was that job?
Worked at the University of Wisconsin in the registrar's office, but my job was to send transcripts out to people who requested them.
And then you also worked at Belkin with the city of Gainesville, right?
Oh, right. Well, that was, I did work when we got married, but lived in Wisconsin, then lived in Virginia for a while, and then moved to Evanston, Illinois. And I did have a job there after Catherine was born, my third child, and worked in goods, paint and art supply store. And my job there was to advise people on how to frame pictures. And I did that. And then after a couple of years, I decided to move my children and I down to Florida. And we moved to Gainesville. And then the first job I had down here was at Belk Lindsay, at the time a small department store in the neighborhood. It was bicycle distance, and that was why I went there, because it was convenient. And I worked there for 6 years doing a bunch of different stuff, but mostly accounting work, keeping track of their money. And then I got a job working for the city of Gainesville in the personnel department as a secretary. And I worked for the city for 22 years and just moved around into a couple different departments.
And you were union president.
I was, yes. When I first started working for the city, I worked in the personnel department. So consequently, I kind of knew a lot of people, and that was like the hub of the place at the time. And I kind of knew what was going on around the city a lot and knew a lot of the people. And one of the first things that happened was the union was having contract negotiations with the city, and they were meeting in one of the rooms up in the building I worked in, and the Thomas Center. And I heard what they were negotiating, and I thought, well, that's really stupid. I'm going to get involved in that. That's like just too stupid. So I did. I got involved and started out being a union steward. Then I got elected vice president, then president. The thing that was stupid to me definitely was I don't remember now if they changed my job title or from secretary to account clerk. And that year, the union negotiated away my cost of living increase. There were about 4 account clerks in the city only, as opposed to 30 secretaries or whatever, or more. And that's what I thought was really stupid. I thought, well, God, how much money are they saving there? Not even 50 cents an hour. So that's what I thought was really stupid. So I thought, okay, I got to get involved in this, and I did.
Why was it that you decided to move to Gainesville?
Because the University of Florida was here, and I knew that my children would have to live at home to go to college. And I wanted to be where it was warm.
So, as you know, this interview will be part of the Pandemic Oral History Project. So now we're going to shift to focus a bit more on the coronavirus pandemic. So can you remember the first time you heard about COVID-19 and your initial reaction to it?
I don't remember exactly what month it was, but now I know it was quite late compared to when it originally happened and other started happening and other people knew about it and perhaps it had been talked about on the news, but I wasn't at the time, like in January and February, I wasn't really into listening to a lot of the news reports because I wasn't in my own home. So I had like a totally different schedule.
Has your reaction to the pandemic changed over time, do you think?
No, I don't think so. It's probably, if anything, I guess I would think it's a lot worse than I think it even had to be.
How well would you say that the United States government has responded to the pandemic, particularly in relation to the responses of other governments around the world?
Well, I think it fails horribly. Especially since recently I've been listening to PBS News Channel in the evening that reports on news in other countries, whereas our news doesn't, that I know of anyway. And I see how they reacted, and the US fails totally and still is failing. It's pathetic.
Has the United States done anything to support you personally in these difficult times?
No. I'm supposed to get some sort of relief check or virus check, but I haven't gotten it yet. I did get a letter from the Internal Revenue Service telling me that there was something wrong with them direct depositing it. I don't know why, but so they were going to send the check to me, but I haven't gotten it yet. I'll believe it when I.
How and in what aspects does the pandemic affect your personal life?
Well, I think about it. It doesn't really terribly affect me other than with my relatives, but I haven't for the last few years. I don't go out much. I'm home a lot. So that really hasn't changed very much. I would like to be able to go shopping, even in the supermarket without having to think about it or worry about it. But it hasn't really been that much of an effect on me. I see the effect, though, it has on my family and especially my grandchildren, who I think carry the brunt of it in this country.
Is there anything you had to learn how to do as an adjustment that you hadn't done before?
No, I don't think so.
Who are you quarantining with, and how have these people affected your experience while quarantining?
Well, they've been very protective, which is great. I'm quarantining with my oldest son, Paul, and his wife, Laura, and grandchild, James, who's 17, and Emma's grandchild, yeah. But Emma decided to move to an apartment with friends, and I think that was a great decision. I'm glad she did it.
When you hear the term social distancing, what does it mean to you? And what are your experiences with social distancing?
I don't really have many experiences with it other than when Emma was here I think it was last week. Yeah, it was Easter. And she stayed a distance from all the rest of us. But I don't really have much personal experience with it. I think it's a great idea and I hope people do it, but who knows? Some states are being open. I guess the people there are being liberated. That's what they call it. I guess they're being liberated from restrictions.
What kind of strategies do you use to maintain social relationships with people who you're not physically with? I know that this hasn't really changed much in terms of like when you were living alone, you also had to use similar strategies. But what are those like, technological like ways that you continue communicating with people who you're not physically with?
Talk on the phone and text a lot. I like texting.
How long have you had your cell phone?
Um, I'm not real sure, maybe 5 years.
Who are the people in your life who you regularly maintain contact with who aren't physically with you?
My children, Emmett and Catherine, and now Emma, of course, she's very good about staying in touch. And she's here in Gainesville. And just, I have a couple of friends that usually no more than once or twice a year do we contact each other. But I've been in touch with them. And I have a cousin who lives in Arizona, and I've been in touch with her. But those are people that only, like, normally it would only be once or twice a year.
So have you been talking to them slightly more now within the past month or so?
Yeah, well, yes. What's unusual about it, it's not Christmas. Usually the contacts are around Christmas time or the first of the year, but this was unusual because we contacted each other to find out how each other were, so that's the difference.
Has there been anything like this pandemic that you've experienced in your life? Or is there anything that you could sort of compare it to with the way people are reacting or the way the media is portraying it?
I can compare it to the polio epidemic in the 40s and 50s. That's the one that I remember the most because it actually affected me because I was a young child. I was pretty young, and we had restrictions about even going outside because we weren't supposed to run and play and get overheated or exhausted, anything like that. So I do remember that.
Do you think that there was similar sort of kind of quarantining type reaction?
No, I don't remember that, but there probably were, but I don't remember it affecting me or my family other than not being able to go outside and play very much. There was quarantine throughout my whole childhood, so that wouldn't have been new. It was kind of taken for granted.
At least in Florida, what I keep thinking of, well, I haven't been going to the grocery store recently, but when I did go to the grocery store, how like people have kind of hoarded, especially like non-perishable items. And it reminds me most of kind of hurricanes, like hurricane preparation. So what do you think of that sort of reaction to this pandemic?
I think it's actually a selfish overreaction because it's not a hurricane. It's not like a hurricane. You're not going to have your house destroyed or no access to water or, it's just not the same.
Sure. Do you know anyone who's an essential worker who's still going into work?
Not really. I know that Allison is a cousin to Emma, and she just graduated from nursing school, and I heard that she's going to work. Oh, I know Rachel, who is Laura's sister, is a vet, and she goes into work. I don't think she's ever stopped, and she still goes in.
Do you think essential workers should receive debt forgiveness for student and other types of debt?
I don't think any more so than anybody else.
How do you view the mass layoffs and salary reductions that have become typical in the last several weeks?
Well, it's very sad because there was a time when I was penniless, and it's hard. It's not pleasant. It's very scary, especially if you have children. And I think they should be helped much more so than anybody else.
I know you were a single mother. What was that like for you, to kind of have that burden all on you?
Well, it was something that I never in a million years would have anticipated. But it happened, and it was obvious it was going to happen. And I guess I was putting myself in a frame of mind to deal with it. And I did. It wasn't the most pleasant time, but it all worked out.
What were the sort of strategies that you used at that time to make sure that you and your children had everything that you needed?
I don't think I had any real strategies. I think that I just did what I had to do at the time. I did have a part-time job by then at this paint art supply place. And I had a friend who, and he still is a friend, but who worked as a therapist of some sort. And he kind of knew how the system worked, mostly the welfare system. And so he's actually the one who said, you need to apply for aid. And he actually took me there and with my children, and I applied for it. And at the time, the caseworker, or whatever she was, said that she told me, if you quit your job, you'll get more money. So I said, well, that seems strange, but all right. So I did. I quit my job, my part-time job, and I did get more money than I would have. I don't remember how much it was. It wasn't much. I actually have my budget still that I had written up. And I mean, it was so minimal. It's sad. But I don't know how I did it, but I did it.
Have you listened to the news throughout the pandemic extensively? And do you trust news coverage of the pandemic?
I trust news coverage. I don't trust the people who are delivering it to the news people.
Do you feel you're getting a full story of how the virus is actually infecting people?
Except for the scientists that are reporting. The government, absolutely not. It's all like make-believe.
What are the news sources that you view as more reliable?
MSNBC, a couple programs on there, a couple of reporters on there. And I've been listening also to some people on CNN. And then the PBS news channel at night, that they're probably the best.
How often would you say you watch the news?
I watch some news every day.
Do you feel that that has any particular impact in, like, I guess, your attitude or your feelings? Or like how does watching the news affect you, or why is it important to you?
Well, the most important thing to me, maybe actually the only important thing to me, is to be sure that the news media hasn't completely bent over and trusted anything that our government says, our president and his crew, and various governors throughout the country.
What do you see as the importance of the election for the pandemic specifically?
You mean the November one?
Mm-hmm.
I hope that by the time November comes, people will remember what went on and how many lies that were told and how it didn't have to be as bad as it is. I mean, just the fact that Trump withholds equipment and money from people that aren't his party, it's incredible that there isn't more upheaval.
What are your expectations of the effects that this pandemic will have for years to come?
I think that I think our behavior is going to be the same as it is now, and has to be. I guess when they develop a vaccine, it might change a bit. People might be a little bit more relaxed, as they were with the polio vaccines.
After, sort of years in the future, after this pandemic, what do you see as the impacts for society of like this moment in time, this period of the pandemic?
Well, I hope that people learn something really deeply and don't forget.
What has this global pandemic taught us about the state of humanity?
Well, I think that's probably the saddest part, because obviously it's obvious to me that half the country doesn't care about the other half. And if old people die, if poor people die, if minority people die, that's like acceptable to some.
In your view, who is or will be most impacted by this pandemic?
I think young people who are currently teenagers and young adults.
Do you think that there's anything positive that can come from, this widely negative period of time? Do you think there's anything like sort of lessons we could gain from it, or anything positive that could happen in the future because of people's reactions to it?
No, I honestly don't. I don't think that things would change much for most people. For some, yes, but not most people. Not the people you would like to see change.
Who are the people who you would like to see change?
The people who demonstrate their selfishness and lack of empathy for other people, which I think is half the country, just about half the country.
What do you think are the most important sort of values um, in dealing with this pandemic? For example, like empathy, things along those lines. Like, what do you see as the most important traits for or characteristics that like we need more people to have?
I would think that's probably basically it. Empathy for other people, regardless of whether you like them or don't like them or hate them. They're people. But people do horrible things to other people. And I think this is one example.
Do you have any additional thoughts? Is there anything else you would like to share or discuss before we conclude this discussion on the pandemic?
I can't think of anything now.
Well, thank you very much for talking with me today.
Well, thank you for wanting to talk to me.